Starting with Iran, really not a lot of change. 36% of voters now say they favor the actions we've taken against Iran. Very, very steady. You know, the very first day we asked about this, the day the bombings began, 40% supported it. It's drifted down a couple of points since then. But for the last month or so, a little longer, it's been in this 36, 37, 39 point range. Republicans a little more supportive than Democrats. Now, there are some signs that people are, I don't know if they're getting weary of it or just getting used to it. The number of people who say they're following the war in Iran very closely is down several points, down to 27%. First time we've seen it below the 30 mark for a while. We're also, when we ask people, how long is it going to take before this finishes up? Remember back the very first survey we did, people thought it would tend to be over in a matter of days or weeks. Well, all these months later, when we ask, only 29% believe the war in Iran will end in the next few months. Excuse me, 28% believe it will end in the next few months. 29% believe it will take 6 to 12 months. And another 23% say, oh, it's going to be longer than a year before the fighting stops. What this means is that 52% of voters, just over half, say that the war will still be going when the midterm elections are held. If that's the case, it will be a very good night for the Democrats. On the flip side, if it is resolved before then, it will be a pleasant surprise to a lot of voters. But right now, the expectation is this war will keep on going, perhaps because of some impatience on that. 40% of voters say we think it's time to increase the military pressure on Iran, to increase the bombings. 51% say no, they would be opposed to that action. When we ask about the trade-off that's been there for a while, is it more important to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons or to end the war as soon as possible? Still pretty even divide. 50% say it's more important to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. 45% take the opposite view. Republicans, by a 4-to-1 margin, very solid margin, say it's more important that we find a way to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Democrats, by a 2-to-1 margin, take the opposite view. Okay, for our 10-10-80 nation, you know, you've heard me talk about this thesis. It's part of my book, Out of Touch, The Elite 1% and the Battle for America's Soul. I argue that there's 10% on the political left are at war with 10% on the right. The remaining 80% are just trying to keep their head down and avoid getting caught in the political crossfires. We asked voters what they thought of that. Turns out 64% said, yeah, that's a pretty good description of American politics today. Just 29% disagree. But we uncovered one of the big, I guess, perception gaps between those who are the 10%ers, those who obsess about politics all the time, and the rest of America. Turns out that 52% of those who talk politics every day think it is more important for a candidate to pursue their party's agenda than it is to represent the views of their constituents. 47% of them say disagree. But among every other segment of the population, very strong support for the belief that no, they should be representing their constituents rather than pursuing a partisan agenda. You know, and that's always been one of the big complaints. Voters say, yeah, they go to Washington, they forget about us, they listen to the party leaders. It's one of the reasons only 11% of voters think their own representative in Congress would even pay attention to them if they cared about a particular issue. Final topic, the traditional Republicans. You know, this comes out of our question. We ask it in just about every survey. If you had a choice between 4 candidates of equal character and competence, would you want somebody who preferred policies like those of Donald Trump, more traditional Republican, traditional Democrat, or an AOC type of candidate? In the very beginning of the Trump administration, 38%. In the very beginning of the Trump administration, 38% of voters said that they preferred a Trump-like candidate. That's down to 28% now. The number who said that they would have preferred a traditional Republican is up to 21%. So, the Trump wing is losing a little bit of its hold on the party. But these traditional Republicans are just so turned off by the current moment. Only 5% of these people, the people who prefer traditional Republican policies, only 5% are following politics on a daily basis. That's half the rate of other wings. The Trump base and the Democratic wings are far more interested in the daily political battles. I guess they feel they have a stake in it. The traditional Republicans don't. Another big gap. When we ask the Trump base or the Democratic wings, more than 90% of them have an opinion, one side or the other, about President Trump. The Republicans, the Trump base, 90% plus favor, they approve. The Democrats, 90% plus disapprove. When we get to these traditional Republicans, 53% of them approve of the way President Trump is handling his job, 45% disapprove. So we don't really know, if they show up, what are they going to be doing? We do know, I've talked in earlier briefings about the fact they are less enthusiastic about voting in the midterms than other voters as well. If they do show up, I think the fundamental question will be, how bad do they consider the Democrats? They're not wild about Donald Trump. They weren't wild about Donald Trump in the 2024 election, but most of them decided, well, compared to Kamala Harris, he's the lesser of two evils. Will these voters in November decide, I'm not really thrilled with where the party is going, but they're less bad than the Democrats? If that's the case, the Republicans may be a little bit better off. But right now, there's not a lot of evidence to support that those who want traditional Republican policies are heading in that direction.